Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Honky Talk. My name is Dr. Lassington, but you can just call me Dr. L. I work at a pet clinic, specializing in clown husbandry and clown rehabilitation. This will be a podcast that covers different things I've seen in the field concerning clown husbandry and general ownership of pets. Now I know what you're thinking, as I talk about all of this. I don't have a local clown shelter. How does this podcast apply to me? Well, I'm here to tell you, don't worry. You do. See, you may not know it yet, listener, but there's a clown shelter just behind your... And behind the... You can't miss it when you know what you're looking for. But with that out of the way, I think it's time I introduce our first topic. Basic mistakes made by new clown owners. Now, I'm not going to try and be your parent. I know that owning a pet is a big responsibility, but it's important to just reiterate that getting a clown for your home is really a big deal. After all, there's a lot you need to know about clowns that you may not think about with other pets. For example, there's the fact that while they are hugely social creatures, you have to be aware what proper pets to own alongside a clown are, and you'll have to be willing to, if it comes to it, be part of their troupe. But if you're listening to this podcast, I bet you already knew that. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of some of these mistakes. The first thing I might bring up, for example, is something I mentioned a second ago. You have to have a certain type of pet with clowns. And everyone should know by now that clowns and mimes can't be held in the same play area or even under the same roof. Ever since old Aunt Martha got mauled by both her clown and mime and she tried to break up a territorial dispute, things haven't really been the same. But, did you know that you need to be careful with the distinct breeds of clown as well? A good example of this is that jesters have a significantly higher prey drive than circus clowns do, and so there's a high likelihood that your jester will not only tire out the circus clowns constantly, but also run into the issue of them not having enough stimulation themselves, leading to them being more likely to misbehave. I suggest that if you've got multiple clowns, be mindful of their breeds and their needs. Rodeo clowns, for example, are adaptable enough to fit in with just about any sort of clown, but circus clowns require a specific kind of playmate, as do jesters. Oh, what's that? So, one of our lab techs just texted me that earlier I said something that might not be too clear to the average person. So, I'll try to explain that a bit. He said that it may not be as common information as I thought, that mimes were not to be held with clowns. So, I'll explain a bit more in that area. You see, clowns and mimes in the wild are actually prey and predator. A bit surprising since they look so similar, I know. But mimes' distinctive patterns are actually a mimicry of that of clowns, jesters in particular, as jesters have the least colorful coloration of face paint. This is actually why American clowns evolved to have brighter colors compared to their French cousins, which reminds me, it looks like it's time for our first educational and historical segment of the podcast. How much do you know about clown breeds? Now, obviously, we've not got time to get into specific years, subbreeds, or any of the true nitty-gritty, but we can discuss some of the more major general archetypes you're likely to encounter in your day-to-day life, with a focus on their history. Each one of these will likely get their own episode later down the line, where we discuss how exactly they came to be, and how to take care of them. But for now, we'll be focusing on the history of a breed per episode during this segment. With that in mind, I'll also need to define the three major archetypes for our listeners, so while these divisions are a bit muddy in some cases, in our vet's office, we tend to divide them into the archetypes of jester, circus, and rodeo, and while there are some more niche divisions amongst them, such as the Pierrot, which have taken on the coloration of a mime as a defense mechanism, those generally fall within one of the others, like Pierrots fall into jesters. Now, I think that's a good enough segue that we'll focus on jesters for the segment today. So, originating in Europe, this breed of clown was thought until recently to be first domesticated by kings during medieval era. However, we'll get to that in a moment. So I'd like to first point out that being mostly herbivorous, jesters had a unique way of forming troops, unlike any other breed of clown we see today. This being that not only were their troops smaller, they tended to include other species of animal rather than simply other jesters. In fact, jesters were, and still are, generally more territorial towards other jesters and herbivorous creatures than they are towards carnivorous creatures, as they see them as competition for their food. Now, with that in mind, jesters tended to use their comedy as a means of universal communication with other species of animal, namely, carnivores whom they had placed as the leader of their troop. This tends to work out in their favor, as in this symbiotic relationship, several different animals have a means of working together and communicating with the jester, while the jester no longer has to fight with other animals to secure its food source, instead leaving that to the carnivores that it has placed at the top of its troop. Now, ironically, this is why they were first domesticated, not by kings, but by shepherds who used them in conjunction with sheepdogs to keep their sheep, rams, and goats in check. It wasn't until they were largely popularized by many different farmers, and that they were being brought into the cities and made a staple of the market, that kings even caught wind of their existence, outside of maybe a nice jester state. And thus, jesters were introduced to Europe not by kings, but by shepherds. Then again, it's not hard to see why people would have the wrong idea. After all, jesters would eventually become staples of courtroom drama, being introduced and popularized in the history books as being some of the few entities capable of legally mocking or insulting the king. This is actually the role in which they were bred to have their iconic jingling hair tufts, as kings were often spooked by their jesterly subjects who were too keen on sneaking up and playing pranks. Strange as it is, we know from notes left by the advisor at the time, one Sir Garfunkel, that it was this final process that led to the iconic appearance of the jester today, with their 3 to 4 long, fluffy, and jingly protrusions of hair on their head. But I suppose that ends our retrospective on jesters. Now, of course, I could go on for a long time about jesters. After all, we mentioned earlier that they have the highest stimulation need out of any clown. But we do have a topic to get back to, so I suppose we'll use this to segue into our next section. And back to that main topic. How not to socialize and entertain your clowns. The first and most obvious thing that I should mention is that when it comes to socializing your clown, the most important thing is to, well, take an active role in socializing your clown. As I've stated several times before, clowns are social creatures, which means that this isn't just a behavioral thing for them. While the details are still largely misunderstood by modern science, we know now that clowns require social interaction to survive, and clowns who are unable to obtain this oftentimes lose what it is that makes them a clown in the first place. Ironically, this is where we get several different types of workers in our society, as these clowns who lost a core part of their being would go on to evolve into their own sort of professions and roles. For example, accountants are descended from American circus clowns, stock market traders from rodeo clowns, and lawyers from jesters, and we still aren't sure what clown breed air traffic controllers come from. But I digress. The most important thing is, of course, socialization, but it's also not true that any socialization will do. I think a really poignant example of this is that you need to be careful when reprimanding your clown, as serious conversations are quickly capable of spiraling out of control and damaging your clown's psyche. Just as you shouldn't use a laser pointer with a dog, you shouldn't try to explain laws or morality to a jester. Another common pitfall is the actual toys you can give a clown for enrichment. While many people know clowns like clown cars, for example, they often are unsure of how they should go about providing one. And please, take it from your clown's doctor, never trust Fisher-Price. Their cars may look nice and fancy, but they have nowhere near the proper amount of space and reality warping potential necessary to entertain your clown for long. Instead, I suggest if you can't afford to furnish an entire clown car, you might want to make an approximation of one out of cardboard, because cardboard, as we all know, has imagination and reality warping properties when in the hands of the right person. We've all been kids before. As for other tools, I suggest still doing your best to either get them professional-grade juggling implements, or simply finding them some soft balls. Alternatively, small bean bags are always a good touch, though I caution you to keep an eye on them if you do provide them these, as the beans within could prove fatal to a clown who ingests too many. Otherwise, partaking in arts and crafts with your clown is one of the most enriching things you can do to help brighten their days. All of this being said, the most important thing you can do is remember that it's your job to make sure they get proper socialization at all. They need the enrichment and stimulation to continue living, and as a pet owner, it's your responsibility to make sure they're getting that. However, I'll also acknowledge that it can be difficult to do so when working full-time, so I might suggest that you look into a clown sitter, or perhaps some programs that would like to bring a clown on to help entertain and keep people motivated. For example, your local public library often has a reading program for children, and these programs are often looking for clowns to serve as a fairy tale figure, in mock acting out of the stories, and what better enrichment is there for a clown than mock theater? But I digress. I'm simply here to give you advice, not tell you how to live your life. As long as you're socializing your clown and keeping them enriched, I can't really fault you. And that really gets to the core of it all. While I do think you should make sure to do proper research before owning a pet, and you should do your best to do what's best for them, the fact that you're even listening to a doctor at all means you must care about them some amount. And they can see that. Clowns are smart pets, and as long as you have their best interest at heart, they'll do what they can to help steer you right when it comes to giving them good care. So, I guess for my final note, I'd like to bring up the idea that... Sorry, I just got a message from our intern. He's saying that... Oh, my 3 o'clock is here early. The office is taking in an ambassador Jester as part of our ongoing work to try and socialize the world in the way of clownology. So I've got to go meet our newest team member, it appears. Apparently, she can't be let loose back into the wild because she had her venom sacs removed by a poacher. That's a pretty common problem. But she's too aggressive to join any troops or European courts. So our office is sort of an ideal situation for her. Huh. Either way, I apologize for the somewhat sudden ending, but I want to once again thank you all for listening. I'll be sure to update you on her status during our next episode. If you've enjoyed this episode of Honky Talk, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow or do any manner of things that will help you find our episodes elsewhere. I'm not really sure how this podcast thing works, so I'm hoping our intern will help me out here. Either way, thank you for listening and have a good day.